All right, welcome everyone. This is the Teacher Verification Model or TVM Lesson Showcase. I'm Adam Kieffer, and Astrid Liden and I are kind of facilitating this session together, but mainly we will have three presenters. And this session is based on the need from the field. We've heard from the field, people wanting to see concrete examples of TVM lessons. And so we've got three presenters here, Elizabeth Bennett, Megan Himes, and Heather Yee. And I will let them introduce themselves briefly before we get into the session here. Elizabeth, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm Elizabeth. I teach in the Dakota GED program in Minneapolis, and I'll also be starting in Burnsville ABE this fall.
Hello, I am Megan Himes, and I teach at Metro North, Blaine Learning Lab, and also at the Anoka County Jail. Welcome.
Hi, I am Heather Yee. I am the Instructional Technology Integration Teacher for Minneapolis Adult Education.
Thanks, everyone. And I forgot to give an opportunity for Astrid to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Astrid Liden with the Minnesota Department of Education. I am the Professional Development Specialist on our state adult ed team.
Thanks, Astrid. Well, we just have a very quick couple things to kind of introduce this topic to you, just in case it's new, before we introduce and let our presenters share. The first slide you're seeing here is, well, what is this? The teacher verification model is new. It's new as of March 2021 for Minnesota ABE. And it's a new way for teachers and programs to count proxy hours for asynchronous lessons that have been verified by a TVM certified teacher. So in this PD process, the teacher becomes TVM certified and not the lessons that they do for proxy hours. So that's a key point to keep in mind. We're certifying the teachers. We're asking teachers to go through this process, and we're not dealing with the individual lessons per se. So what counts? Oh, Elizabeth, you were going to tackle this one, I think, right?
Sure, I can talk about this briefly. I think the main point here to remember is that TVM is about lessons, not just giving your learners stuff to generate contact hours. So we want these lessons to have components of instruction, practice, and assessment. TVM lessons should be based on Minnesota adult education content standards like the CCRS, the North Star standards, and the ACES and TIF standards. And we want to make sure that TVM lessons include really clear directions for learners and a plan for learners to receive feedback on their work. TVM lessons can be online, they can be paper-based, or you can use a combination of both.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. So the opposite of that question is what does not count as a TVM lesson? And it's basically anything assigned in isolation without context or connection to what's happening in class. An example might be just handing someone some isolated workbook pages with no support, no opportunity to receive feedback, maybe no review of the instructional component. Asking students, hey, did you watch that YouTube video link I sent you? You know, those are the types of things that would not be up to the TVM standard. So again, we're focusing on getting teachers to go through this professional development to become what we're calling TVM certified, so that you can develop lessons or retool lessons to count them for proxy hours. And if you're not TVM certified, you can still use TVM style lessons or your colleagues' TVM lessons if they're shareable in some way, but you will not be able to count proxy hours for your learners' work on them. We're really focusing on getting individual teachers to go through this professional development and hopefully collaborate with their colleagues in their department or program. All right. So the steps, I think Astrid, you're going to talk us through this.
Yes. So if you are interested in getting TVM certified, you'll need to complete a number of steps. The first of which is to complete DL basics training, going through either DL distance learning and blended learning basics for adult education online course or the distance learning 101 cohort. You'll need to complete modules 5 and 6 in that course and pass the quizzes. As part of module 6, which is focused on TVM, you will need to create a sample TVM lesson and materials. You'll participate in a TVM certification webinar where you'll have an opportunity to review the information from the course and spend some time in breakout rooms to get peer feedback on your sample lesson. We have the dates here for some upcoming TVM certification webinars. And just to note, you'll get the registration links for those in the Distance and Blended Learning Basics course. After the webinar, you have the opportunity to revise and then submit a final sample TVM lesson that will be reviewed and then approved by our distance learning review team. Once you get your TVM certification and the CEUs, you'll want to pass those along to your manager and make sure that your certification is recorded in your staff history and SID. We're running reports to just ensure that everybody who's using TVM has gone through the certification. And once that happens, you're TVM certified. You can start using the process and the lesson tracking forms and assigning lessons and collecting proxy hours for your students. So at this point, we want to move to our showcase lessons, but there are a lot of other resources that you can use to get more information about the teacher verification model. We presented a session earlier today that was an overview of TVM. You've got the link here to the session slides, and you can go back and access that recording. You have the link to the Distance and Blended Learning Basics course, links to the Adult Ed website and the TVM page, and then this DL support desk email for any questions you might have. So this PowerPoint is linked in the Sched app, so you can follow all of these links to get more information later. At this point, I'd like to turn things over to Elizabeth, who is going to share our first teacher verified model lesson.
Hi. So I picked a lesson that I thought was pretty straightforward, and I'll show you all the pieces of it in a minute. It's for my blended math class. And in the Dakota GED program, we are a one-room schoolhouse program. So my online math class is all levels and kind of an open enrollment. I have students joining at any time. We have both synchronous Zoom meetings where I use Jamboard pretty much every class to get students to collaborate and show their thinking. And then the other half of the class is independent assignments that students complete in Khan Academy. So it's really important for all of my students to have a basic handle on how do I use Jamboard and how do I use Khan Academy so I'm actually getting the most out of those resources. So I had this, first it was kind of a makeup lesson. I had gone over this content during a Zoom session, but then of course a lot of my students have joined me since I first did this during a class in the spring. I had these lesson components kind of in our learning management system, and then recently I decided to rework it in a Google Doc. And that allows me to just share a link to this view-only Google Doc with new students as they join. So I can just email them a link to this assignment. It's nice, it's really reusable as new students join my class. I thought this was a nice example of a way that TVM can be really useful for teachers in one-room schoolhouse or other open enrollment settings. So I'll show you my lesson template very quickly here. As you can see, I just recently reworked this and resubmitted it this week. My objectives for this lesson are just very simple. Students are going to be able to locate and use features of the Khan Academy videos and website, and then also locate and use tools in Jamboard. This is not actually explicitly addressing any math or CCRS standards, just North Star and TIFF standards in this lesson. But of course, anyone doing this lesson would also be in my math class where they're getting CCRS math. And then I just have a link here to that Google Doc, which I'll show you in a moment. This lesson was very straightforward. So the instruction is just 2 videos, 2 screencast videos. And then there's a third video that is optional for students about using Jamboard on a phone if they're not using a computer. There's no review or summary of instruction because this is completely asynchronous. The practice is having them actually go to a Jamboard and practice using the different tools that I taught them in the video. And then the assessment portion is a quiz in Google Forms. I was thinking I could probably be a little more generous on my time allotments. And as I have a few more students actually go through and complete this lesson in this format, I may go back and resubmit for more proxy hours. I had just said, you know, each video was about 7 minutes long. So I said 15 minutes for the 2 videos, half an hour to practice playing around in Jamboard, and then 15 minutes for the quiz. But I'm thinking for some students, they're going to need actually more than half an hour to get to the Jamboard and figure out how to use all the tools I'm asking them to use. And they may need to rewatch the videos. So I think I would be justified probably in doing, I don't know, maybe 1.25 or even 1.5 hours for this. And if that is something you can do as you're submitting your TVM lessons, if you figure out that, you know, that time I estimated was not very accurate, you can resubmit with a revised proxy hour amount. So I'll just show you the Google Doc now. This is view only. So I send my students a link in an email, they click on the link and they land here. I've got all my instructions right up here at the top. You know, this lesson is about using Khan Academy and Jamboard. I do tell my students that they will earn attendance time for completing these activities. That I find that is motivating for some of my students. But then obviously, you know, the main point is that you'll be able to use these tools so you can really focus on learning math in our math class. So I've got a link to, I'll just show you one of my videos that I made in using Loom. It's just a simple screencast of some slides. And then I do have a link to the slides here if students want to go back and just read through them. And then a second video about using Jamboard. And then I actually have a practice Jamboard. So it looks like this. So if you're not very familiar with using Jamboard, whenever students click on a link to a Jamboard, they always land on frame 1. So it's a good practice, I find, just to get in the habit of putting the directions right on frame 1. So that's the first thing your students will see. Also, students new to Jamboard, they don't always know how to get to the next frame. So I'm sure to have a screenshot of that rectangle with the arrows and the arrow circled that they need to click on at the top of the screen to move to the next frame. I did an example frame here, and then the rest of the frames are just blank for, they do have the directions. And then students will just practice using the various tools and interacting. I've got one sticky note on there already that they can click on and edit. And then they need to add a new sticky note and use some other tools. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to recommend, I'll drop this link in the chat real quick. Almost everything I learned about using Jamboard, I learned from Chris Class's webinar in January. So I'll just drop that link in there for you to have later. I think Jamboard is a really awesome tool for math, but I've also been using it in my online reading class as well for getting students to interact. One more Jamboard tip. Yes, Chris Class is great at all the things. One more Jamboard tip. This frame, you might notice it looks a little weird with the border around the edge. And that's because I've actually saved it as an image. And then I set the image as the background because something that students do is click clear frame. And if you don't have the image set as a background, that erases everything on your Jamboard. So especially if you have an open link like this where anyone can just go in and edit it, I don't want students to accidentally erase all the instructions and example. So the first few couple frames are just images, and the directions are an image on each of the blank frames for the students to interact with. So back in my Google Doc, so after they play around in the Jamboard, they do have a Google Forms quiz. And I make sure that students have to include their email and their name so that I can verify, who completed this. And I've also included some questions in the quiz about like what did you actually write or draw in the Jamboard. There's the link to it if you didn't actually go to the Jamboard yet. Which frame number did you work on? So I can go back and I will have to check both the Jamboard and the students' responses to this quiz to verify that they watched the videos and did the work on the Jamboard. I also tell the students to email me when they've completed the whole lesson. That's the disadvantage of putting lessons like this in a Google Doc, is that there tend to be more pieces that you have to go back and check to make sure that students have actually completed the lesson. It would be nice to have it all in a learning management system, but this is a little more accessible. Students don't have to set up their profile to join our learning management system. I can just email them a link when it's this way. Any other questions I can answer at this point?
Elizabeth, you're nearing the end of your time, so just FYI.
Sure. Yeah, I've pretty much shown you everything I was going to show you. So are there any questions at this point, or I can hand it off to Megan? Well, thank you, Liddy and Julie. You are kind. Links to the Google Doc and also the lesson plan are at the end of these slides. So you can all check this out later and make a copy or do whatever you would like. At this point, I'll stop sharing my screen, and Megan, I'll let you share your screen to share your lesson.
All right. Mm-hmm. Well, of course, it is not letting me share my screen. Okay.
Christine, does she need to be made a co-presenter?
She is already a co-host, so I'm
Okay.
not sure what the issue is.
Well, if somebody could share, just to move time along, if somebody could share, all of my links are in the presentation. So I was just going to walk through those links. So if somebody's willing to assist me, and
Sure. Are you seeing the slide with the screenshots right now?
yes, perfect.
Okay. Which would you
Thank
like me to open any other links right now?
So we can just, since that time at the beginning, if you'll just open the first link, which I believe says cover letter, it should be in the notes.
The one-step equations packet.
Well,
Is this the right one?
Metro North, as I said earlier, but I also teach at Anoka County Jail, and part
Uh-oh.
I think it's on Megan's end.
I wonder if we should go to Heather and have Megan call in and present after.
Yeah, Heather, are you available to do that?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Heather.
Mhm.
Can someone hand it off to Heather?
So Heather, you should be able to share your screen. Yep.
You should be seeing my screen. So as
Yep.
I said, I am the Instructional Technology Integration Lead for Minneapolis Adult Education, which basically means that I work with our teachers and staff to find ways to integrate technology to support instruction and student learning. So this lesson was actually created as I was working with a teacher last spring who wanted to include Desmos in her classes, especially for students asynchronously, without requiring them to go to yet another platform to access the content. So this was what I came up with to create for her. And the lesson was actually is a set of 3. It was originally a single one. But then as I worked further, I realized that having multiple or having all of that content into one piece without getting feedback from their work it's too long for the students. And so I broke it up into 3 pieces. Logistically, that also means that if a student weren't to finish the full one, we couldn't collect any proxy hours. But if I break it into 3 full mini unit or mini lessons, we can record proxy hours for each mini lesson. So what I'm going to show you is the first mini lesson that I created from the 3 today. And as far as building the lesson, I wanted to fall back on one of my golden routines, or one of my golden pieces is with routines. And so each lesson starts with a video. Then it goes to exploration with a Desmos activity, and it finishes with some application problems. By having that pattern, students can just follow along and focus on the learning without needing to figure out what's happening where and what they should be doing each page. So there's a little bit more continuity and calm for students when they're working with the technology. The first part of the lesson, the instruction comes from, as I said, a Khan Academy video. So for this one, I used lesson to introduce the concept of ratios and how they can be written as a ratio or as a fraction. And then the students get to explore in Desmos how ratios change as they change the layout of a farm plot. And then it finishes with short word problems applying their knowledge. Each of my questions, or each page of the lesson includes a question. So all the way along the way, I'm getting formative assessment from the students with each piece of it. And this lesson is provided to students in Schoology, which is a learning management system, if you think of it like a virtual classroom, to provide the materials and allow students to interact with those instructional materials and activities. And so as soon as I publish that lesson or set of lessons to students, they have access 24/7. They don't have to worry about losing it, asking me for access, asking me where to find it. It's all right there in their Schoology course. And when they're done, the material type that I'm using for this lesson is like a quiz. And so the students get to review the questions, go back and make changes if they want to, and then submit when they're finished. Schoology automatically will score all of the objective questions in the lesson for this type. And for this lesson, all of my questions were objective. So students see their results almost immediately after submitting. As the teacher, I can also go back and review the student responses and add my own feedback directly within the questions. So as students are reviewing their results, if I have added feedback, they see it right away. And then for that reviewing part for the students, that is something that they do need to learn. So this lesson assumes that they've already learned that and encourages them to review those results individually after seeing the feedback or seeing their score. And before I jump over and show you the actual lesson, I just wanted to highlight a few more things that I'll show you in the lesson. In addition to the things that I've talked about already, Schoology can notify me. I can set it to notify me every time a student makes a submission. Also, when I log in, I can see on my teacher dashboard that lessons have been submitted. If I use what the Schoology calls a student completion feature, the students can see whether they have finished each lesson without having to open it. And one of the challenges going with this student completion, one of the challenges that can happen with giving students multiple material, multiple lessons in a learning management is that students might move forward before they've actually learned or mastered the content or the skill that they need to in the current lesson. Student completion can allow me to set a limit and require a student to obtain a minimum score before they can move to the next lesson. And then one other piece that students can, in the same class, we've always got students who are higher or lower, they've got gaps, others don't. I can individually assign materials to specific students or to groups of students that I've created in Schoology so that they only see the lessons that they individually need to complete and their page isn't cluttered with extra lessons that they don't need. So, all right, can someone confirm that you can see my Schoology page right now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. All right, so this is the 3-part lesson. I put it into a folder with some basic instructions. So this is what they should do. And when they open it, they can see right away. The first one is blue and it has a link that I can click. The other 2 lessons the student can see, but they can't click on those lessons because this student completion is in effect. This first one is just the student must make a submission, or I can also make it so the student has a minimum score on that when they submit before it'll unlock the next one. Opening the lesson, the students get the instructions right away. And this is what it looks like for students. I completed it to give you an example. So this is what it looks like for students when they're looking at the score. So they see their full overall score and then individual questions. They can see the score for each question. And then as a teacher, let me switch my screen here. This is what it looks like if they've not completed it. The video is here with the question. the question here at the bottom, and they move through. Desmos is embedded right within, just like the Kana video was embedded. And students could sign in with their Google account if they have one, but they don't have to. They can continue without it just by entering their name, and then they get to explore completing the pieces. And I can go into Desmos to review the student work and see what they've done. And the cool thing with this one is it will show what 3 other students have said in the discussion tools so that they're still interacting with one another, even if they are asynchronous, which is kind of a cool feature. But I didn't want students to have to go to a separate platform, and I wanted them to get feedback on their understanding right away within Schoology. So they get a question based on this last page of the Desmos activity. And then there are 2 short word problems for students to complete to check their understanding in an application setting. From the teacher view, I can go in and I can add feedback. And as soon as I add that, it will go right underneath the question. So I'm going to go and I can see whether the students got it right or wrong. I'm going to go into the student one and show you that now again. And right below the question, the student will see whatever feedback. Schoology also allows me to add audio feedback. So they're depending on student level or student need, as well as teacher preference, I can provide feedback in various methods. And that is my TVM lesson in Schoology. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much, Heather. Any questions for Heather? Julie's commenting how great to have someone like Heather in your AV program who can create these lessons for instructors. Yes, they are very lucky. Unfortunately, many programs do not have technology integration specialists like her to do this. So thank you so much, Heather. At this point, we were able to get Megan back via phone. Megan, can you confirm that you can hear us? Looks like you are muted on your end.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay,
Great.
I will do my best here. I have just lost all power at my house, so I am literally in the dark.
Well, thank you for persisting.
Okay.
Elizabeth is showing your slides, so you can talk through
Perfect.
whatever piece you would like.
Sounds good.
And people can go
Sounds
back
good.
and access the files later.
I will do my best. So thank you for, well, here we go, plugging along. So the first thing I was going to show you, so Elizabeth, I don't know if you can hover over the links and open the one that says, I believe it should say algebra lesson cover page.
Yes, we've got that one up.
Okay, perfect. So, so as I was starting to say before I was cut off, this lesson is designed for the students that I teach in corrections. It is a paper packet because students in corrections often don't have access to live internet. And so that being said, I still attempted to create something that was meaningful and had instruction and all of those pieces, and not just, you know, worksheets and busy work. So this is based off of some worksheets that I had previously used specifically for procedural skill and fluency, but I built it into a TVM lesson that includes instruction. It starts with a cover page, because if I don't have access to my students, my only communication with them is through whatever I'm writing them or whatever they're sending me back. So because it's not always that I have video visits or phone calls with them, so a lot of it is, especially if we're in lockdown or during COVID, it was back and forth through the mail or email being scanned from corrections staff. So the cover page is important because it just walks the students through what the packet is, what the expectations are, but also letting them know that even though the instructions are written out, that I'm still expecting them to pace themselves as though we were in a class together. I tell them, you're not going to read this just like you would read a book or a story. You're going to chunk it out, read it one section at a time. And even in the instructions, as I'll show you briefly, I explain to them, you know, okay, now go try this number. Now go try this number. So that guided practice is built into the instruction. It also just tells them what to do with the extra pieces. So part of the packet includes a tracking page for them to stop and write down questions for me and things that they were struggling with. Also to denote their time. So when they start and stop each time they're working on the packet, it's a way for me to track them. And then also the assessment, which I'll show you in a moment here too. So if Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind opening up the one that student questions tracking form.
We've got that open.
And once that's pulled up, and it's very simple, right? It's just what book or packet are they working on? What page number or problem number were they working on? And what was their question or comment about what was going on for them during that time? And it seems simple, but it's a good way to get the students, or at least I have found, to get them to interact with the material. So they're thinking about things as they're moving. And this is an expectation of completing this packet. So leaving this blank is not an option. And even if they're like, oh, I got that one right, or it doesn't have to be anything, you know, extensive, but it's encouraging them to interact with the material. And then if you would please then open, I think what we left off with, which was the one-step equations packet. And then once that's pulled up, and Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind scrolling through it slowly a little bit so that people can see what I'm talking about. The whole first part of the packet is handwritten instruction. So this is where the instruction is built in to this lesson. And I wrote it as though I were actually in front of the classroom speaking to students. And as I said, it's built in that I ask them to stop it sometimes, like, okay, now go try this on the attached packet. And the reason it's handwritten is two reasons. One, students expressed to me early on, especially in corrections, that they preferred the handwritten lesson. It felt to them more like a connection and maybe a letter. But also with math, you know, I'm tech savvy, but sometimes it's easier to draw things out than it is to try to find examples online and copy and paste. So it's handwritten, and then it's attached to practice and then also answer keys so that students can check their own work, but it also gives them that procedural skill and fluency practice as well. And then we can skip over this one. And then, so Elizabeth, if you wouldn't mind opening the last one I have there, the student math self-reflection. So instead of attaching to this particular packet, instead of attaching a quiz or something, which I have done and asked, but I will give that to the deputies, and then the deputies will actually hand that to the students separately once they've turned in their packet. Sometimes, depending on what corrections environment you're in, staff can be helpful and maybe sometimes not helpful, but I've had success in them even helping me time students in doing things sometimes if I want them to only spend a certain amount of time on something. But this particular this particular assessment that I attached to this one, it was more trying to get at the metacognitive part of what they were doing. Like, you know, what did you work on? What strategies did you use? And asking them to really, well, think about what they were thinking. And then I asked students to keep a math journal. And so part of this is referring them back to that, like, what did you use in your math journal? What did you put in your math journal? So also connecting previous lessons, and also asking them to take some notes for possibly future instruction. So overall, that is what I put together, and that includes those pieces. The time of it, and Elizabeth was saying this and I was feeling the same way, that originally the way I figured out the time for my lessons is to, I would give a packet that I put together to the two ends of the spectrum in my room. So a student who's, you know, picking up things pretty quickly, and then a student who maybe struggles a little more. And then I'd try to find an average. I am finding that for some lessons at this point that I might need to be a little more generous with the time. But I think sometimes too, that just depends on the students that you have. But as Elizabeth pointed out, and that you've maybe learned in the other TVM presentations, is that you then have the option to resubmit and ask to adjust that time if you feel like that's necessary. Because that is really, you know, guesswork on our part, because we can't always know what students are going to do. And then for me, the way students turn work in is essentially, right, when they're online, they could submit it. But for me, students either have to turn it into a staff member and they either scan it and email it to me, or they put together a packet and I go pick it up. I then correct and respond to the students, and then they get their work back with my response, and then it just continues on that way. So hopefully that all made sense. I'm trying to get that across this way. Are there any questions that anybody is posing? Because I cannot see, obviously.
Thank you so much, Megan. No questions in the chat yet, but we do have just another minute if anyone wants to type in a question for Megan. We do have a comment from Christine that she loves the reflection questions.
Thank you.
And others saying, well done. And people appreciate seeing a non-tech approach. Sarah's asking, what if a student does not return the packet to you?
Excellent question. That does happen, especially in corrections. Students come and go more quickly than I can keep up with them sometimes. I don't always have a student and that happens in the community as well. So if a student doesn't complete the packet and they are still there, I might reach out and communicate with them, asking them what's going on, and try to approach it from that way. But even from distance, for me, if it's required work, and right, for attendance purposes, because even through distance, right, there's attendance policy. So if they're not meeting those expectations, then it might mean, if it's a continued behavior, then it might mean that they don't get any work moving forward for a while. It kind of depends on, good question, but it depends, I think, on the situation and the student, really, and whatever the policies are for wherever you work.
Thanks, Megan. Elizabeth, can we go to we're just about at time here. Can we go to our final couple of slides? Thank you so much to our three panelists and for the amazing teamwork and tech support to make it possible for Megan to share her lesson. You want to go back just one slide, Elizabeth? Our panelists have included links to their lesson plans and materials. in the slides, which are uploaded in the SCED app, so you can go back and explore at your leisure. We're excited to be able to have you follow up and take a closer look at these lessons. And we're looking forward to more opportunities in the coming year for teachers to come together to share their TVM lessons and potentially to work together on developing some. So thank you all so much for attending, and to all of our panelists for sharing their lessons. If you've got more questions about TVM in the future, you can follow the links that were shared earlier in the presentation or contact the MNAB Distance Learning Support Desk.